Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for show 3 of the Cyber Incision live stream for the CISSP Certification Study Group, where we're going to be digging into each and every domain, discussing the topics, answering your questions, and providing real-world examples for those looking to not just get certified, but expand your knowledge and bring it into a practical workplace environment. So for those of you who don't know us personally, I think a few of you who are on have already met us, spoken to us live, and seen a couple of our shows. But my name is Joel Bork, and I work full-time as a threat hunter at IronNet Cybersecurity. And joining me, my co-host, is a senior account executive at Uzado, Brandon Krieger. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joel. This is going to be another great session of studying the CISSP.
Absolutely. I absolutely dig the shirt, Deadpool. I hope a third one comes out in the near future.
It's sad to hear about Chadwick, huh?
Oh, man, I know. Black Panther, he was fantastic. He lost the battle. 4 years, it sounds like he was going through that battle.
Which no one really knew, which was amazing on his part, like all the things he was doing, while battling cancer.
Man, and you know what? The crazy part was he just kept working. He kept leaving a legacy, and man, what a legacy he left.
That's pretty crazy. And I mean, all the things he did, like all the movies and, being, an African-American superhero and all that, bringing that in. So just amazing.
Yeah. I mean, he changed the movie industry by bringing Black Panther to theaters. So yeah, definitely something to look up to. So rest in peace. All right, here we go. Brandon, jump in real quick. Give me a quick 30-second, 1-minute recap of what we covered last week before we jump into this week's content.
Okay, so do you guys remember, I know all you guys watching here, do you remember we covered the alignment of security, functions to company strategies, goals, missions, and objectives. We dug into strategic, tactical, and operational planning. If you guys don't remember this, go back into the books and resources that we provided. Go back and review it. Also, you can watch the videos that we've done already. Just make sure that you're prepared and kind of keeping up with the videos, though. So then we're finished. When we're done all this, you can go write the CISSP, or at least start to do the practice questionnaires to get you prepared for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bert, welcome, buddy. Thanks for saying hi, and absolutely inspirational. Once again, congratulations on your new job. You start Tuesday in the InfoSec world. So congrats. I'm excited for you.
So what's Bert's new job?
Yeah, so Bert is, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but actually, Bert, you're on. Tell us about your new job. Where'd you get a job? What are you going to be doing? And we'll circle back to you here in a minute as we jump into catching up on last week's, but please, in the chat, Bert, tell us what your new job is. We'd love to hear it. All right. Thank you guys all for joining us real quick. We are going to catch up. Last week, we had a little content that we weren't able to squeeze in due to some technical difficulties, but we're going to circle back around and talk about change control and change management. Now, change in a secure environment is, can introduce tons of loopholes. As soon as you make a change, it potentially opens up another attack surface, right? Things can overlap, oversights could occur, and they could all lead to new vulnerabilities. So the only way to maintain security in the face of all of this change is to make it systematic, right? To have a process, have extensive planning, logging, auditing, monitoring for all of those activities, so you can have the right security controls in place.
So Joe, before we jump into just my part there,
talk
a little bit about the actual controls. Like, what controls are we looking at?
Yeah, there's lots of controls, right? And I guess the controls that we're looking to have are, and you're talking about the testing, the logging, the auditing, the monitoring, all of those controls? Yeah.
I think we need to talk about that just a little bit on the technical side, because as, a CISSP, as a manager, director, even a VCISO, CISO role, you got to know the technologies too, because these questions, and my understanding of some reading over some of the practice, you kind of have to know what you're applying, how you're applying this. It's just not theoretical. You have to actually understand a little bit of the technology.
Yeah, and so before we get into the technology, and let's definitely get into the technology, but I want to talk about the planning, right? The extensive planning. So a number of years ago, our organization, they had to put together their CAB, right? And the CAB is their change advisory board. So any change that somebody proposes, it has to be submitted for approval. It gets put on a PowerPoint slide for the CAB to review that week. It's reviewed by a number of bought-in parties, right, for the different groups in our organization, and then they can either approve, deny it, and then that gets pushed into a technical realm.
Right.
That's essential. You guys have to have a cab. You have to have those changes not just reviewed and approved, but they have to be documented for auditing purposes. And now we get into the technical side of things.
Right, and that, I mean, you're going to have the organizational units. I mean, it could be facility services, it could be your financial, it could be HR, it could be IT, it could be all these ones that have to at least buy into the change and the project that's going on. So working in the Ontario government, I remember, when we were doing any type of projects and we were sitting around in the boardroom, every department would be part of that original discussion, and depending on how the project would roll out, they would actually be there through the full project, or at least they'd have to buy in. We come in at this point. We don't need to be involved into the first phase or second phase or third phase, whatever phase that may be, and we'll come in at a later phase. So just to know the planning and the organizational units that are going to be involved in this as well is a good thing when you're talking about like any planning. There's planning solutions like ITEL, things like that, just to kind of get yourself familiar with different change management processes.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be touching on ITIL in another domain as well. But once you get into the planning and you have that and you map out where the associated parties are going to jump into the different phases, that's when you got to get into testing. So let's just take a new application, right? You have a new application. You're going to have your infrastructure team or your application management endpoint team test that application, right? So they'll spin it up on a test device. They'll make sure it doesn't interfere with anything else, right? That it's not opening up another attack surface through another application or through a dependency that also has to be applied in order to run that application. And so there's extensive testing. I know our team, no matter what change we do, whether it's a firewall change, whether it's an application change, whether it's, whatever it is, they test, and then they test a little more. And through that process, they're also logging it, right? So logging, auditing, they're doing the monitoring of those activities. And then once it's pushed to prod, they continue to do those same activities, making fine-tuned tweaks along the way.
For sure. No, totally agree. So going back to some of the technologies, they usually involves extensive planning, like you're talking about. So testing, exactly. Now logging. So now you've got logging as in actually minutes, in actual, documentation, but then you got the technical logging. That's why I wanted to actually talk a little bit about that, so people understand, especially the guys that are veterans in CISSP and the security industry know this. People that are coming up, and some of the people that are watching that might be studying this and might be a little familiar with the IT, but not the security side. What are some of those tools that we'd be using? Like endpoint, SIMs. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this was an interesting one. I thought it was, and I'll bring up a real world example. So yeah, we talk about SIMs, right? You have to have all your logs in one place. You have to be able to go back in time and see those logs. And then at audit time, you have to be able to prove it. What was interesting was in order to pass one of these audits, and I want to say it was SOC 2, they came in and they looked at our SIM, they looked at our logging for all of our systems. They're like, wow, this is incredible. And then they went, okay, show us your physical security cams. And we're like, oh, we got this, right? Here's the cams. We got every entrance. We got every server rack room. We've got our physical security down pat. And they said, okay, show us how long you log those security cams for. We're like, what? Like,
the recordings.
We're like, well, we keep them for 2 weeks. And oh, no. You got to keep those for 90 days. It's like, right? So then we had to go back and we had to test, make sure we had enough storage that we could support that much 4K video footage for every single security cam and then roll it off appropriately. So that's just an example of logging, and then you have to audit, right? Once you have that logging in place, can you actually go back 90 days, pull up video, and review it, and then continuous monitoring of those as well.
Right, and that's a good thing to know, guys. And you're looking at, kind of like you said, you've got SIMs for monitoring, you got different tools like that, you got your CCTV cameras that you're talking about, and generally there's a control room for that where there's actual many displays or a control panel where you can change from camera to camera. So all these things, just be mindful of as you're studying this, kind of the different controls that have to be put in place, because some of these questions, from my understanding, they're going to ask that if in this scenario you have this and this, what would you be doing and how would you be? So you have to kind of have at least a base understanding.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to get back over to the chat. Guys, if you are listening in here on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitch, jump in the chat, say congratulations to Bert. He's going to be working as a cyber defense analyst real time at Exelon Monetary Nuclear Energy Production Systems. Say that 3 times fast, isn't it? Yeah, so congratulations, Bert. I'm really excited for you. You know, this is a guy, and he's had grit. And it just like studying for the certification, he went through multiple SANS courses, has multiple security certifications, all while working full-time and having a family and renovating his home, right? I mean, we all have life, but, man, the grit Bert had to get this job, man. I'm super proud of him.
Awesome. Congratulations, Bert.
Absolutely. So cool. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into a few of the things that when making. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. So, I mean, the goal of change management is to ensure that any change does not lead to reduced or compromised security. Change management is also responsible for making it possible to roll back any changes to previous secure states or evaluating the risk if a rollback is not possible. So, this is really important too, is having that window. Right, having that window of being able to roll back. I know for a couple projects that I worked on that were kind of critical projects, they were done over the weekend, right? They were done on off hours. They were done that. And there was a window. There was a window where it was a rollback window. So if anything like that, point where you cannot pull back, you had that window for 5 hours, 6 hours as you're doing it for testing. And if it didn't work out, you had the ability to pull back to original state and then go back into testing.
Yeah. And so quick question here to the people listening. Have you guys ever encountered a situation where rollbacks were not possible? I would love to hear you guys' there may be a unique situation, but I know for us, we're software as a service organization, when we deploy our product, you're right, we have that change window. And then after that, you can't roll back, right? Or you have to submit for another change request through that organization in order to roll back to a previous version. So definitely some nuances when you're playing the rollback game, and some organizations give you more time than others. And how do you balance that risk?
Right, exactly. And I think it's important to kind of look at that because you're talking about incident response then at that point. Then sometimes after when remediation then has to go through change management.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and so it was interesting when we were looking at this list. So they provided a list for the CISSP prep of all the things change management should be used for, and it was like design, development, testing, evaluation, change management for just evaluating something, right? Implementation, distribution, evolution, growth, ongoing operation. So really, change management should be built into company culture is what that comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's any technology. When you're changing technology, if you don't have change management to track, then there's got to be something missing, right? And you don't know what's happening.
Oh, looks like Sean has an example. So we'll let him type. And Sean, I want to come back to that example. So feel free to share with us if you're able to. But he at least has had an example where he was not able to roll back. Now, real quick, the negative impact, change management's all about reducing the negative impact of changes. It could be just capabilities, right? Something could, one thing goes wrong in a change and it has catastrophic effects. Other things could just be minor pieces of functionality, but also performance. There have been times when you make a change and then performance scales to a point where it's breaking other pieces of the system. So change management is in place so you can test that, log it, audit it, and make sure that doesn't happen.
So let me ask you this. Now, doesn't that bring us back to the CIA?
Yeah, confidentiality, integrity, right? Absolutely. And then, what's the A?
Availability, right?
You got it.
So, and this is what the thing is. I mean, I was reading over on the weekend, just reviewing some of our notes on that, and it kept saying that this is the CI, the confidentiality, data integrity, and availability is really one of the foundational principles that you have to know in all this is because as you're going through change management, as you're going through it, you're looking at all those aspects again. So when we're going through change, what's the confidentiality? When you're going through the integrity of the data or the systems, and then the availability, like you're saying, does it go down? And is there kind of a change management window where we have to look at changing it back and rolling it back? So there's all these things as you're going through change management. You got to kind of, as a security professional, you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. Tony Yvonne, she said, yes, please share, Sean, as long as you're not driving. I'm not sure if that's a jab at my comment last session about doing something while you're driving. But yeah, Sean, if you're driving, take your time. Don't respond yet. We can always circle back around to it another time. All right.
Exactly.
Cool. So I wanted to talk, actually, I'm going to let you talk about parallel runs if that's cool.
Yeah, sure. So one example of change management process is a parallel run, which is a type of new system, developed testing with a new system and the old system are run in parallel. So this is very interesting. And right now, when we have cloud solutions, all that, they can do that extremely easy. VMs, same thing, pretty easy now. Where before you had to build up a whole production and development solution, now you can just spin up a cloud solution, a kind of an instance, and you can have both running at the same time. So really kind of interesting the times we're in right now. So each major or significant user process performed on each system simultaneously to ensure that the new system supports all required company's functionality that the old system supported or provided. So now you're talking about kind of going through a test phase just to make sure that user base, you got your test analysts that are going through it, you got your user base that's testing it, maybe even be a selected group that's testing it right now to make sure they have access and they can do all the functionality and go through that. And a lot of times there's a checklist. They give them a list that go through. Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Are you able to do that? You log in, access, all that stuff. So this is very important to think about.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring it back. So I took a AWS DevOps course, what was it, a couple weeks ago. But what they call this in the new AWS cloud infrastructure world, it's called a blue-green deployment. So what it means is, okay, you have you've already tested this release, you've sent it through QA, you've logged it, you've audited it, you've been monitoring that system. But what you do is you have your production level environment, you spin up an almost identical environment with those changes made, and what you do is you'll do a cut over to your new release, and then if you have to, you can make an immediate cut back, and that's called a blue-green deployment in AWS terms.
Oh, okay, blue-green, nice. Okay, yep. I know in marketing they call it A/B testing, right?
There you go. Yep. Oh, Sean, do you want to touch on that real quick, Brandon? What Sean's?
So his was the major ERP upgrade, heavily customized. We got to a certain point during the upgrade, and the application didn't work. My team spent several hours trying to fix. Give me a second here. I'm going to see there's got more here. There's a long example. So fix. Past the rollback time, we ended up getting it fixed early Monday morning, just in time for everyone to start working. So that's kind of crazy because I've heard horror stories like that, and I've been part of a few projects myself. I don't know if you have as well. That's kind of like what Sean's dealt with, where you're like up 24 hours trying to get this fixed, and all of a sudden, like at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, it finally works. All the Google searching, the troubleshooting, the white pages, the forums, being on tech support, doing all that, all of a sudden it works, and you're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And then you have to start your shift.
No. Well, so here's the interesting thing, Sean. I was talking to somebody, and we were doing a lot of our changes after hours and on the weekends or Friday night. And it was interesting because they said, no, that is the wrong way to do it, because what happens is the right people may not be working, right? So you should be doing changes in the middle of the business day, where all the key stakeholders are present, where you can make changes, make quick fixes, and roll back if required. And while I love that advice, our clients just aren't buying it. They're like, nope, we're not making any changes during the middle of the day. It's got to be after hours. It's got to be weekend. So, man, how do you manage risk when you know you should be doing it one way, and then your clients give you pushback and say you got to do it another? Also, just a quick touch, ERP upgrades, right? ERPs are enterprise resource planning software, but also they are like business process management software applications. So that could be an integral part of the enterprise that Sean was working for. So yeah, imagine if you pass that rollback window, and thank goodness you guys got it fixed by Monday morning. But yeah, that could have been a big deal.
Well, I think the great thing about tech roles, like something like Sean was dealing with, and their expertise is that's their job. Like just on a side note here, a lot of these guys are troubleshooters, right? They're guys that under the gun, your last ditch effort, you throw these guys into it, and they just figure it out. They make it work.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but we have a couple people who are really, really good they are our guys. They're the troubleshooters, right? We got this guy, Mr. Stewart. Man, this guy can troubleshoot anything. But imagine if he, decides to actually unplug his device and put it down and go on date night, and then you go into a change, like, oh, that would hurt, right?
I remember in the government we had two Russian guys. One guy, his name was Vlad. Amazing guys, highly, highly technical. They were sporting the Novell group-wise server. And when there was ever issues, they would always get called in. They were so relaxed. And all of a sudden, it's down for like an hour or two. They go, I'll be right back. and all of a sudden it would be back up and going. And you'd ask them, like, what do you do? And they're just like, yeah, I just fixed it. Don't worry. And in the back end, like they're doing something like some coding, something to make that work, right? There's, little bandage fixes that they're doing. I remember Carl, I think he was the Cisco, same thing for the government. Just so relaxed, but he was the guy, like the closer. You get him to come in, the last ditch effort, and he'd be able to fix it. He'd just make it work.
Yep. And I'm going to be honest, he was probably just bouncing services in the background, but yeah.
just resetting.
That's it. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our next section, which is data classification real quick. We should be able to rip through this. It's a pretty simple concept. But really there's, data classification or categorization is the primary means by which data is protected based on the need for either secrecy or sensitivity or confidentiality, right? So every organization has internal only documents. That's probably the one example everybody's heard of, but there's a few main ones that we want to touch on here today.
Right. It's really inefficient to treat all data the same way when designing or implementing a security system because some data items need more security than others. Securing everything is a low security level means of sensitivity data is easily accessible. Securing everything at a high level is too expensive and restricts access to unclassified non-critical data. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like what would be critical sensitive data that we would be protecting right now?
For your organization or for the government?
Just in general. What would you say?
Well, I mean, so one of the examples that I heard, and it relates back to national security, right? Was we had fighter pilot plans that were leaked, right? And China came out with a fighter pilot that looks identical to ours, right? Same capabilities, same speed benchmarks, everything, right? So somebody had breached sensitive, and that's actually probably top secret data, leaked it, and then another nation is able to produce weaponry exactly like ours.
Well, one of the things we've talked about, and I mean, we've heard this time and time again with hacked, is PII information, right? Personal identifiable information. That should be, like at least a higher level and then encrypted, right?
Well, so let's go through these. It has to be
protected.
Let's go through these, right? Let's dig in, and I think it's actually not for a while, but can we start and then we'll come back to the content we're working on now? Let's start with the classification levels, and as we talk about it, we'll fit in those certain pieces in. So really, let's come down. I'll highlight this for you, but there are two sets of classifications, right? There's government and military classifications, and then there's commercial and business or private sector classifications. Now, the government has 5 levels of classifications, and they're listed. So I'm going to start at the bottom and really work our way up. The first is unclassified. Now, these first two I'm going to list, which are unclassified and sensitive but unclassified, they're not technically classifications, but instead they're markings or labels, right? So the actual classifications are later in this, but these first two, unclassified, which is data that's not sensitive nor classified, right? The disclosure isn't going to hurt a darn thing. And then sensitive but unclassified, or SBU, is data that is probably best used for internal use only. But if it's leaked, it also isn't going to hurt anybody, right? But it could violate individuals' rights. So those are the first two labels or markings. Jump into the next two for me, Brandon.
So, I mean, we got confidentiality. Now, I'm just kind of looking through our notes here. Confidentiality is the use for data of sensitive, proprietary, or highly valuable nature. Kind of information that we're looking at is a sense of trademark, copyright, legal forms, things like that. So the authorization disclosure of data classified as confidential will have noticeable effects or cause serious damage to national security. This classification is used for all data between secret and sensitive but unclassified classification. So I'm using this more for business sense, but I mean, it's kind of more relating to military, right? Military endpoints, but we got to know kind of cross as well as how to work for, because most of us are working the day-to-day business, right? Corporations. So again, when we're looking at copyright infringements, you're looking at NDAs, you're looking at PII, these can be considered and classified, as my understanding, as confidential. Now, when you look at secret is used for data of a restrictive nature. The unauthorized disclosure of data classified as secret will have significant effects and cause critical damage to national security. Now, let's talk about like how would that be for business? So we're talking about national security.
Well, hold on. So this is the military and government version, right? So maybe not. Let's not talk about that yet, because the private is the private sector uses a different list. So
Okay.
let's touch on these, and then I definitely want to get into those real quick. So if you're talking about confidential, and real quick, we got the chat going on. Let's head back. Okay, integrity is paramount for banks' availability for energy and confidentiality for healthcare. Absolutely. And looks like we had a question, Dr. Tony. Where does CUI or controlled unclassified information fit into that category? Now, I'm going to take a guess, but I also want to follow up with you after this, Doctor. It's kind of cool I get to say that now. Congratulations on getting that title again as well. But that's going to fit into sensitive but unclassified, right? So it's controlled, it's sensitive, but it's still unclassified information. So it's, once again, it goes unclassified, sensitive but unclassified. Then we jump up into the actual classifications where it's confidential, secret, top secret. And that's the government means of things. Now, we'll get into the business side here in a minute. But confidential is going to be things like financial records. It's going to be things like emails, data, low-level data being sent and messages being sent back and forth that are typical employees, right? But when you get into the secret realm, now this is data of restricted nature. This is high-level officials messaging back and forth that could have significant effects or cause critical damage to national security. So these could be politicians talking back and forth. These could be plans that aren't quite top secret, but very sensitive in nature and could cause harm. And then we have top secret, which is the highest level of classification. And then even in the government, there's a couple tiers of top secret. But this means that if this data is released, it could have drastic effects and cause grave damage to national security. And I'm going to say that the jet plans being leaked, that was top secret data. That could potentially have detrimental effects on future power shifts, across the world.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's true. And I mean, I know I haven't come across this type of chart myself personally from my data because I don't deal with military implementations of data and security, but it's good to know for the exam.
Yeah. And then what happens and this is kind of off exam, that what we shared with you is really what you need to know on the exam are kind of those 5 tiers for the government. But then just for your guys' edification, if you haven't worked with the government, once you get a top secret, then they have a number of different polygraphs you can get, right? So you can get a top secret SCI, and then you can get a CI polygraph or a full scope polygraph where they look into everything about you. They go and interview, they send somebody out to interview your whole family. They'll ask who else knows you. They'll go interview those people. It's pretty intense, and they do not take it lightly.
All secret and above classifications are exempt from FOI requests. That was from Sean.
So let's go FOI requests. I'm actually not sure quite what that is, Sean. Let me.
So once you find that, let me know. And I
there
know,
you go.
So what's FOI?
Basically, if somebody's requesting information or certain records, they're exempt from that, which is really interesting. So the Freedom of Information Act, I had no idea, Sean. That's do you have a clearance? Maybe we shouldn't go that far, but but yeah, so you can make an FOI request and basically get information in which they can reply. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to dig into that after this. Thanks for the share, Sean.
Awesome.
Now let's jump into your realm, Brandon. So let's talk about business, right? So the first one is going to be your public. Do you want to jump into that?
So again, we're going to go from bottom up, right?
Yep, that's it.
So public is the lowest level of classification. This is used as all data that does not fit in one of the higher classification. Its disclosure does not have a serious negative impact on organization. So there's public, and then there's next is sensitive. Sensitive used for data that is more classified than the public data. Negative impact could occur for the company if sensitive data is disclosed. So let's talk a little bit about what would be classified. Like, what if someone's going to go and look at their data? What would be public? What would be sensitive?
Yeah, so public, and real quick, I want to touch on this, Sean, because I did find an article about what you're talking about for FOI requests. So freedom of information is you have the right to ask to see recorded information held by public authorities. And what Sean is saying is that if you have secret and above classification, you're exempt from those, which is pretty cool. So that's what he was referring to in regards to that exemption. Now, when we're talking about business, back to business. When you're talking about public classification levels, this is things like marketing slicks, right, that you're sending out to everybody and their mother already. This is things like things that are publicly available on your website that you also have on a data share within internal, right? So these are public. It's not sensitive, no negative impact when it's leaked. But then when you're talking about sensitive, this is an internal only, right? So if you have to go through and you have to describe for a client that you have under NDA something that's really proprietary to your software, maybe some of the issues your software has and they have to know because they've already purchased their software, that's sensitive. That could cause harm if it gets into your competitor's hands, for instance.
Well, and you think about that, and I just kind of use that as an example, like sensitive information. So if you're working with a client here, marketing or a business development company, and you have code that you're doing, or you have design elements that you're working, or if there's some sort of project or plan you're working on that hasn't gone out to the public yet, that's still in development, that has maybe copyright or trademark infringements, these can all be considered as potentially as sensitive information because as you're working with it, it has to be protected.
Yeah, and I'm going to go a level further. So for businesses, you have public, you have sensitive, and then the picture I'm looking at that's in the CISSP book is the high level is confidential and private, right? And there's a line in the middle. So really for businesses, it's public, sensitive, confidential, and private is the highest tier. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that code or source code is going to be confidential or private, right? I mean, if your source code is leaked, that could be detrimental. It could have a significant negative impact for your company or the individuals if that private data is disclosed.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Sean's saying no. I'd love to understand no. Is that just for something we said, or you just kind of saying no in general?
No, I'm sure he'll clarify and happy to clarify. Or if you have any additional comments on that, Sean, feel free to throw in. And then Bert says, what's your background, Brandon, right? So this is kind of fun because we have two very different backgrounds.
Yeah, so my background is actually in IT from the Ontario government, and then I do sales right now for cybersecurity. So I have a marketing background as well as IT for a couple companies, government for 7 years, and then I've worked in cybersecurity sales for almost 4 years now.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, great question, Bert. All right, and then let's jump into organizational roles and responsibilities. But before we do that, any final comments on data classification, Brandon?
No, I just think it's important to kind of understand, especially data right now being, all the ransomware and the attacks. It's really kind of to understand how you classify and protect your data. I think that's just so essential now.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest, for the exam, if you type in data classification for government and private sector, just look at the pictures to get the mental image of how that tiered structure works. Because I'm sure there's going to be a question, is confidential above or below sensitive but unclassified classification level for the government? Something like that, where it's going to be like, oh, those two could be flipped around pretty easily, will be on there. So just get a quick mental image of what that layered approach is and go at it from that approach, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah, so true.
All right.
Awesome. So our next group is here, or the next section is organizational roles and responsibilities.
That's it. So we have to talk about security roles. So within an organization, there's tons of security roles. Not tons. There's really 6 main ones. But this is the part in which an individual plays in the scheme of security implementation that the administration has implemented within an organization. Man, that was a mouthful. Basically, it's what security role do you play in an organization. So let's jump into these security roles. And I believe there's 6 specific ones, right? But these are not always static, right? So some people can take on different roles and it changes over time.
Well, the first one they mentioned is senior management. Mm-hmm. The organizational owner, senior management role is assigned to the person who is ultimately responsible for security maintained by any organization and who should be the most concerned about the protection of its assets. Senior management must sign off on all policy issues. In fact, all activities must be approved by and signed off by a senior manager before they can be carried out. So I think that's really important when we talked about change management, right? Knowing kind of the authority.
Well, look what Sean just posted. He said, this is all about understanding compartmentalization and a need to know. And he's spot on, right? So when you talk about security roles, the senior manager compartmentalized is the signing authority, the decision maker, the one who says we're going to go this direction or this direction, and then also who has a need to know, right? So that senior management may have multiple smaller organizations rolling up to them, and all of that data doesn't have to be shared between all 3 organizations, right? It could be you could have that data segmented up where each organization doesn't have a need to know about the other organization's change requests, right? So quite possibly. Cool. So that's the first security role, right? Is senior manager. Next one's going to be your security professional, right? And this is going to be your InfoSec professional. Bert, you're stepping into this role now. This is going to be the role you're taking on. You may be part of the CERT team or the computer incident response team, and they're trained on network systems, security engineers, application management, all of the above. And you're responsible for the directives, and it says mandated, but asked from senior management, right? So the senior management says, hey, Bert says, great. Yeah, just wait, buddy. There's a lot in this can of worms, believe me. But, they're going to say, hey, let's just say our incident response plan is activated. They're the ones who are going to activate it, sign off on it, kick it off. Well, they're going to bring a lot to your plate. Bert, they're going to call you up and say, hey, your role's been activated. Let's jump in. And you're going to be the one who, you have the functional responsibility for that security. And for implementation.
So what are some roles that he'd be looking at?
What do you mean? What are some roles that he'd be looking at?
Some responsibilities as a security professional. Like, what are some responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to throw the first one out. So typically, when you said you're going to be an analyst, that typically means you're going to be dealing with some form of alert, whether it's endpoint, network, whether you're monitoring cloud environments, so guard duty alerts, whatever it is, you're going to have to take an alert, and you're going to have a requirement to clean up a certain amount of alerts over a certain threshold and monitor, maintain, improve analytics for those. And that is a mandate pushed down from senior management, right? We have to have this much visibility, and we can't let this slip, and you have to get down into this level, and you have to get eyes on everything or part of it or whatever the risk threshold that they've accepted and they've dedicated those man hours towards. How was that? Did I explain that well?
It's good. Yeah,
cool.
I mean, that's good. And then we have to look at, they might have to write tickets, security policies, change management. There's all different kind of responsibilities of actually, documentation, right? And responding to incidents. You might, depending on how you rank your incidents, there might be SEV 1, SEV 2, SEV 3. That might be your escalation process, or priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. So you might have to be one that responds to it as well, and then writes, a debriefing note about them.
Yeah. And so remember, security professionals in the CISSP world, they are not decision makers. They are implementers, right? So the decisions when it comes to CISSP is the decisions have to be left to senior management. Now, the reality is you have some middle management, you might have a team lead who's capable of making some of those decisions. But so there is levels to this thing, but in CISSP world, the senior manager makes the decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. And then just remember that.
Yep. So head off, and the next one's going to be data owner.
Yeah, data owner. The data owner is assigned to the person who is responsible for classification information for placement and protection with a security solution. The data owner is typically a high-level manager who is ultimately responsible for data protection. However, the data owner usually delegates the responsibility of the actual data management task to the data custodian. Yeah. So let's kind of walk through that a little bit, right? Because now you got the data custodian. So I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, well, easy example, right? You go on Google, Google Docs, and you create a document. It belongs to you. Let's say, and so in this example, as a data owner, you're responsible for who you share that document with, right? And for what restrictions. Can anybody click on the link that you share? Just employees, so you're responsible for the data classification of that document. But then there's another role, and the next role is data custodian. So in certain environments, okay, you may have access to create all of those, but if you want to share that, it has to go through a data custodian who says, okay, do these people have a need to know? And if they don't have a need to know, should this be classified differently than it is right now? And that comes back, right, once again to the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? If somebody gets access to that document who shouldn't have the need to know and they change it, well, that messes with the integrity and the confidentiality of it.
Right. Yeah. It's so important. Now, what are some functional groups, like in the sense of just kind of the users? Because I know you got like HR, finance, all that. So kind of thinking in that realm, in that line, is when you're looking at data owners, data custodians, and then next you got users of the data, which you're going to cover. I think it's important to kind of think of those organizational groups too.
Yeah. Well, and this is where it comes back to least privilege, right? You have to audit least privilege. So when you go through, you're going to have different types of users, right? the hard part for me is it's one giant security role. Is there the users or they're the endpoint? I just called users endpoints. That's terrible. But they're the ones gaining access to the data, who can use it, who can share it, who can manipulate it at times. So you have to be able to go through and say, okay, this is my dev team. They should have access to this. This is my marketing team. They should have access to this. It's interesting. We got some more technical sales guys who, man, sometimes they get keys to things that you're like, how did you get access to this? Right, using Splunk. Like, let's talk about users using Splunk. Now, okay, we're going to take it a step back, Bert, because if you have access to Splunk, you're a security professional. Right? So, but once again, you should have no user. You shouldn't have a dev gaining access to Splunk. You shouldn't have marketing with access to Splunk. Sometimes I'm sure they ask for access, and then do you audit that? Do you make sure it's pulled? Let's just take physical security, right? We have people who were part of the security organization responsible for physical security, but then they moved to a different part of the organization. Well, I'm pretty sure they can still have access to those CCTVs. But do they really have a need to know? Are they being used as a backup still for that role? And if not, it's time to act those controls. So.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. Like, one of the things I always heard about and saw was, when your receptionist or the admin in the office has access to the server underneath their desk, right? And you hear in small companies, and they have like the finance records, client information all under the administrator's desk, and you're like, where's the security there?
Well, and that's the crazy part is those admins, they're the first ones to get phished, right? Because they're managing a couple people's emails. So they're the ones clicking the links saying, oh, is this something they actually need to read? Let me click on that. And then boom, they have access to the financial records, the server under their desk, and there's your data breach. Cool. And then, last but not least, jumping into the person who is meant to audit those security controls, the last security role is the
auditor.
You got it.
Right. So the auditor is responsible for reviewing and verifying the security policies is properly implemented and derived security solutions are adequate. The auditor role may be assigned to a security professional or a trained user. I just hearing that just kind of, it's like nails on chalkboard. A trained user.
Well, pause. Okay, pause. Guys, anybody here have comments on that? Trained users. So the hard part about it, I've seen a lot of auditors come in, and a lot of these guys, they are great at writing up reports. But as soon as they get into the technicals, they don't know the first thing about it. They say, okay, show me this. And you show it to them, and it's like, okay, looks good. Moving on to the next topic. And it's like, man, if you would have looked one step deeper, what you would have found would have scared you out the doors, right? So it's important to have a trained user who knows the technology who can go in and actually audit it. That's my 2 cents. And work before, not just audit alone, but work with the auditor to audit it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for now, when we have so much aspects of data security, data classification, and protecting the data, having just a trained user, I think right now we need to start looking more at security professionals, because they have to have that mindset of the security of a holistic view, not just, hey, I've got this data and it's HR's and I'm just protecting it and I know where it is and I can sign shared permissions and things like that. They need to look at compliance. They need to look at the holistic view of what actually the data is being protected and why. Yeah. So that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that in the chat. Just let me know. But that's my opinion when it comes to data classification. Because, I mean, you and I have read like so many breaches when, data has been compromised, and just imagine an auditor being a user, or just a trained user protecting that data. To me, that's like, oh, it's like having like, in my working physical security, it'd be like having a 13-year-old protecting the door to the bank, right? Like, how much can they really do, and how much do they really know how to protect it, right? Don't get me wrong, they're trying their best, but you got to have someone that has the understanding holistic of security, right? Of the company, the organization, the actual risk, that if that data gets breached, what's happening? If that data gets compromised or shared to someone that shouldn't have access, they have to have that responsibility too.
Well, and that's what I'm starting to absolutely love about this training and the actual certification itself is all these pieces are so interwoven. Right? So you're talking about, okay, just a trained user running the audit, but then the next section is security control frameworks. So when you're talking about security control frameworks, it comes back to what Sean said, understanding compartmentalization. Well, if you have a security control framework, who is going to be responsible for that framework, right? And it's not just writing down a few ideas that's going to be your framework for security controls. It's planning, and who are the right individuals? Maybe there is a trained user in there, right? And I know I took a DevOps course a while ago, and they said it's DevSecOps now. Like, you have to have a security person in every single aspect of development. And it's like, but do they really need to be there in every aspect? And I argued no. I don't think that you need a security person in every part of the developmental process. I don't think it's required. So now there are places when it is required, right? And you have to plan for that. That in this stage, this is when you bring the dev together with the security individual, with the auditor, to make sure that these security controls are in place, to make sure you've checked the correct boxes and that you've updated the right binaries, updated your dependencies, etc.
Oh, exactly. Now I see you have a little Dilbert cartoon here.
Yeah. So guys, if you have a second browser open real quick, take 2 seconds, type in Dilbert meeting for a meeting. Real quick. I'll give you 10 seconds. And I'm actually on vacation with my parents right now, and my mom heard that. She just started laughing because they were big Dilbert fans. But I'm gonna read it to you real quick. So the boss walks in. He goes, "Okay, let's have a little pre-meeting to prepare for the meeting tomorrow." And I'm going to let you be Dilbert.
Oh, my God. Oh, yeah, here. Woo! Do you think it's safe to jump right into the pre-meeting without planning it?
The boss then goes, "Okay, let's get this preliminary pre-meeting going."
You think you're funny, but you're not.
So his coworker leans over to Dilbert. "You're not funny," but the boss bought it, right? But no, okay. So while that may seem absurd for holding a meeting to plan a meeting for a future meeting, when you start planning for security, you have to start planning the plan. And then you have to move into planning for standards and compliance. And then you have to finally move into the actual plan. So while it sounds absurd, you do actually have to plan for the plan and then plan for those next steps before you can actually implement.
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about here, and we're just kind of looking over our notes. Skipping any of these plans steps can derail any organizational security solutions before it even gets started. So think about that. If you're not kind of planning, you're missing steps.
Yeah, right. I mean, imagine if we plan for the plan, right? This is what we're going to do for our security control frameworks. We skip pieces of the standards and we go straight to compliance. Well, if you miss the standards, they may be something that you just completely overlooked, and you can't do that, right? So first and foremost, and I know we got about 10, 13 minutes left. Oh, looks like down here real quick. I want to touch on this before I jump into the COBIT side of things, but looks like Dr. Tony said ISO 27001 tools include a good RACI chart. Yep, absolutely. That helps shows the roles and the RACI for each team member. That's fantastic. So now you can group your team members in your organization into that chart. Definitely helps with the framework. Great share, Doctor. And then
yeah, he finished off that this includes including security during evaluation of requirements for new services, products, etc. So,
Hey, Brandon, I got to bring up some feedback. We had some feedback from a previous session that we say guys frequently, and we don't want to leave out any females because I believe there are some power females out there who need to get their CISSP and start taking over their share of the world. So let's be aware of that. Let's be inclusive, and let's keep those ladies. Dr. Tony, Yvonne, that's for you. Let's bring them into the conversation as well.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Cool.
If we are, sorry, I apologize.
But no, it's good to be aware of, right? So it was great feedback. We'd love all the feedback we can get from this as we move forward. So
for sure.
Cool. So now, just like you mentioned, ISO is one of the frameworks, right? And I think one of the ones is ISO 27002, which replaced ISO 17799, right? And these are standards for implementing organizational security. COBIT is one of the ones that the CISSP certification touches on. COBIT is COBIT. And that is a documented set of best IT security practices crafted by the ISACA, right? So Information System Audit and Control Association. And what it does is, so I'm stealing some of the stuff Brandon was supposed to talk about, but that's all good. It's prescribing goals and requirements for security controls and encourages the mapping, right? So similar to the RACI chart for team members, but the mapping of IT security ideals to business objectives. So that's huge, right? When you think about it, the CISSP, it's all about business objectives, security, meshed together, and that's what COBIT touches on. Now, I'm not as familiar with it, so this was a great learning experience for me, but and we're going to break it down real quick. 5 principles. Ready, go, Brandon.
Well, first principle is meeting stakeholders' needs.
So business, right?
Yeah, business and the top level, right? right? Top level stakeholders, and then kind of every aspect. So you got your board of directors, you got your C-suite, you got your, all different, user groups or different divisions. All of them have to be bought into it. So second one is?
It's covering the enterprise end to end, right? So first your stakeholders. Now you're looking at the entire organization. And the third one is?
Applying a single integrated framework.
So pick one. Right?
Yeah. So
that's hard.
Yeah, it is. Right? Because there's so many out there that you can choose from, right? To be able to work this project, pick one to use.
Yep, use it. And then principle 4 is enabling a more holistic approach. So you've enabled a single integrated framework. Now you take a step back and you can look at, okay, where are the key parts that this framework really helped us with? And then where are the parts it's lacking? And let's go and let's implement those from a holistic approach. And that brings us to principle 5.
Which is separating governance from management. No, why is that so important?
Conflict of interest, really.
And what is that? What would be the conflict of interest? What do people need to know?
Well, so governance is going to be I hesitate to go back to audit, but auditing, reviewing, ensuring, the policy writing, and then management is the implementation, right? So as a manager, it's easy to want to take the easy route, right? And if you're doing the governance and the management, that may sway the government's portion, right? You may decide not to take a certain path because from the management perspective, it's going to be really difficult.
Can also be logistically logic separating governance of you have some governance that's enforcing this project that you need to do versus what management wants to do as well. So you have to keep all those into consideration as you're doing this. So there might be some governance that you have to do for HIPAA, some compliance, something that's saying that you need to do these controls, and then you have to look at the management of that, and you have to have that separated. So I think it's important to think about that as well as you're looking at this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you thinking about the test with COBIT and you're like, oh my gosh, I've never even heard about that before, don't worry about it. I was in the same place with you. Now, COBIT is only modestly referenced on the exam, so further details are not necessary, but you should probably know those 5 principles. So if nothing else, if you're taking notes, if you got a notepad on your computer, pull it up, type in COBIT 5 principles and where it's from, right? ISACA. ISACA. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
The Information Security Audit and Control Association.
That's
just
it.
To help you out if you have to look it up.
Yep. Now there's a couple others, right? So they may test on a few of these. Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual, or OSSTMM. It's a peer-reviewed guide for testing and analysis, so that's going to be one. ISO is going to be another. And then the other one is ITIL. And typically what I've seen on exams and I'm not sure if any of you guys have used that CISSP prep app on there. I have a test question for you guys here at the end that I actually got wrong that I want to share with you. But what I've seen for ITIL is they typically bring in where it's from. And it's from, can anybody tell me, where's ITIL from? Top of your head? Brandon, do you know? Well, you're looking at the document, of course you know. But go ahead and tell us.
Well, the IT library? It's
ITIL.
from the it's from the British government, right?
Yep. So it's the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, and there's a number of ITIL certifications that auditors and security architects are required to have as well in England. It's like one of the top ones. So if you hear British security framework, it's ITIL like every single time. So you'll probably see that. Cool.
Awesome. So we've got about 6 minutes, 7 minutes?
Yeah, I think we could do. I think we can rip through some of this. Are you ready to try?
Yeah, we can try. Do you want to throw out that question first?
Yeah, let me do it real quick. Okay, so I was
just throw out the question. Just throw out the question, not the answer yet.
All right, guys, here you go. Get ready. The question is, with what phase of business continuity plan does a company proceed when it's ready to move back into its original site or a new site? Right? So the organization, they went to a failover site and now they're ready to move back. Is it A, damage assessment phase, B, project initiation phase, C, reconstitution phase, or D, recovery phase?
Okay, so guys, in the comment, in the actual chat, so ladies and guys.
Thank you.
Please put your answers in there. Let's see who gets it right.
And we'll come back to it here at the end. Deal?
Yeah, for sure. Deal.
Okay. So
Awesome.
we got to get into some legal and regulatory issues. And this is domain 1.3. Guys, domain 1 is one of the biggest. So we're going to spend some time because it's about 15 to 20% of the exam. So we're going to spend this show and probably 2 or 3 more really on this section. And then a few of the other domains are much shorter. But we're going to jump right into legal and regulatory issues. The interesting thing is, well, I'm going to throw out a quick fact. I actually just requested information for a cybersecurity law degree. So I'm just going to leave that there and let it sit. Don't know if I'm going to do it yet, but figured I'd leave that on there. But cybersecurity is intertwined with the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good to know. So jump into compliance with laws and regulations for me, Brandon.
So first we're going to talk about gross negligence. Gross negligence is the opposite of due care. It is a legal important concept. If you suffer from loss of PII but can demonstrate due care in protecting the PII, you are legally strong grounds. For example, if you cannot demonstrate due care, you're grossly negligent and you are much worse legal position. So you can actually, and this is I want to be very clear because this was something important that I learned was when you're gross negligent, you can actually be held legally responsible financially as well as criminally. So you got to be very careful.
Yeah. So real quick, when we talk about negligence, it comes back to liability, and this is kind of towards the end, but it's the prudent man rule. And the prudent man rule, you're almost guaranteed to see this on the exam somewhere, but it's the rule that requires officers and managers to perform the duties with diligence and care that ordinary, prudent people would exercise under similar circumstances. So if it's common sense, if it's something the judge should be like, why didn't you do that? That's the prudent man rule.
For sure.
Cool. So let's go ahead and keep going. Now, quick preface on the exam. There's a high standard in regards to compliance laws and regulations. You don't have to know it like a lawyer, but you have to know when to contact legal. That's the key. So, right, if you're breaking search and seizure laws due to confusion over the legality of a search for an employee's personal property, for example, it could cause a very negative consequence, right? The most legally correct answer is often the best for this exam. And that's my 2 cents on the exam that I picked up on from reading notes. And then we're going to probably touch on the major legal systems, and then we'll wrap up for tonight.
Right.
Cool. First one, civil law. This is our legal system. So the most common major legal system is that of civil law. And this is the one that many countries use throughout the world. And this civil law system leverages codified laws, right, and statutes to determine what's considered within the bounds. So very strict, very rigid written law, right? Next one.
So common law is the legal system used in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and most former British colonies, amongst others, as we see by the short list above. English culture has historically been the main indicator of common law being used in the countries. The primary distinguishing feature of common law is the significant emphasis on a particular case in judicial, precedent and determinants law. So I'm trying to look at here, just trying to see if there's an actual example. Common law is a major legal system.
I mean, we get into it later, right? But but this common law. So if nothing else, if you're going to study one of these, right, common law is the one. It's going to be the major legal system that's referenced by the CISSP exam.
Right.
And if they say, okay, which legal structure is created from English culture? It's common law.
Right.
Cool. Now, the other type of law is religious law, right? So this serves as the third major legal system. And now Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, they've all had significant influence on national legal systems, right? And we take a lot of our legal laws and views from religion. But there's another religion called Islam, that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. And Sharia law is a type of religious law that really dictates the national legal system in the Middle East, right? So they use the Quran, and I think it's called the Hadith. Please, I apologize if I got that wrong, but they use those books as its foundation, and it has a significant impact on the national legal system.
Awesome. So it looks like we've covered most of these right now.
Yep. And then
different. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we've covered most of them, and then next week we're going to get into criminal, civil, administrative law, and those are basically the 3 types of common law. Yeah, and we'll get into that next session, and then we'll jump into those. We got examples for each, some pretty fun stuff. I know we were trying to get a lawyer on here to explain some real-world examples for you, so we'll see if we can get that done. If not, it'll be me and Brandon next week for show 4.
Awesome. Now, let's see. So you guys saw that question that Joel had. So just trying to see the answer. So far, we've got Bert has said D.
Okay.
Just want to see if
So that's
anyone
recovery
else
phase.
just want to see if anyone else chimed in. Dr. Tony, redistribution phase. Couldn't recall which letter you mentioned, but that is my answer.
Well done. That's it. I'm going to throw it out right there. And I got this one wrong. So, Bert, I was on your side. I said recovery phase. I figured, hey, getting back to where you were. But it's actually the reconstitution phase. So it's moving back to its original site. They're reconstituting their presence there, right? So once they're out of an emergency, the reconstitution phase. So once again, I'm getting that. There's a free app that basically they just have ads on the bottom of the questions, but it's CISSP Prep. And the cool part about this app is the ones you get wrong, it makes you do it a second time and get it right. So repetition, repetition, repetition.
Awesome.
Cool. Brandon?
Well, first, thank you so much, Joel. That was awesome. I think it was a great study session. Guys, what'd you think? Guys and girls, what'd you guys think? Comment in the actual chat. I gotta get so familiar with that. I'm just so used to that common phrase, just guys, right, in general.
Totally. I'm there with you.
And it's to me, it's not actual gender. It's just, people.
It's just, it's a phrase, but you never know how it's interpreted. So we'll get better at that. Thank you guys all for joining. Brandon, you rock, man. Thank you once again for helping me put these together. And I'm excited to take this and push everybody to the next level with us.
Oh, and it's awesome. So, guys, just so you guys know, and Joel didn't comment about it, we're actually going to be revamping the show a little bit. You're going to see some new branding, some new designs over the next week or two, just to update everything and just kind of get a different look and feel. So we're going to have to play around with that. Let us know if you guys have any questions or comments or feedback about the show or about the study session, things that you want us to cover, even just things, I think we're going to be implementing more questions. Right? I think we were talking about that before the show, is just to help people out as you're going through the CISP, just get some prep, and we're going to throw out some questions throughout the show just to get you guys practicing.
Ooh, maybe we could build that into the visual somehow have the options in the question. We'll see what we can do, guys. I know he's giving you a sneak peek into what we're doing, but guys, thank you so much. We seriously, we love you guys. Have a great week, and we will catch you guys on show 4 next week.
Awesome, guys.
Have a great one, Brandon.
You too.